Silence is usually misunderstood. Most people treat it like emptiness, like the absence of value. They rush to fill it with explanations, jokes, opinions, and proof. They speak early because they're afraid the room will decide who they are before they can announce it. But silence isn't emptiness. Silence is leverage. Not the kind of leverage that crushes people, the kind that steadies you, the kind that keeps you clean, the kind that lets you see what's real before you invest your words into it. Because words are expensive. Every sentence you release becomes a commitment, a position, a signal, a trail. And once you speak, you can't unspeak. You can only defend, revise, or retreat. So the question isn't, how do I outsmart everyone? The question is, how do you move through people, through rooms, conversations, negotiations, friendships, or conflicts with such clarity that you don't need to perform your intelligence? How do you win quietly without humiliating anyone, without manipulating anyone, and without turning your life into a chessboard where you can't relax? Here's the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. The average conversation is not a search for truth, it's a search for safety. People talk to locate their status, they talk to reduce uncertainty, they talk to test the temperature, or they talk because silence makes them feel exposed. And if you pay attention, not with suspicion but with calm observation, you start to notice a pattern. The first person to rush in often reveals the most. The person who fills every gap often shows you their needs. The person who over-explains often shows you where they feel weak. The person who interrupts often shows you what they fear losing. This isn't about judging them, but it's about learning the language people speak without realizing they're speaking it. And once you learn that language, you stop needing to talk so much. You begin to understand something simple and quietly life-changing. In many situations, the smartest move is not the cleverest sentence, it's the cleanest presence. A presence that doesn't ask permission to be taken seriously, a presence that doesn't chase agreement, a presence that doesn't beg the room to understand. Because when you stop trying to be seen, you start seeing. And seeing is where the advantage is. Think about the last time you were in a conversation where someone won without raising their voice, without dominating, without making a speech. They didn't win by being louder, they won by being harder to read without being cold. They won by listening so well that people revealed the map. They won by speaking last after the noise had spent itself. And they won by letting others argue with their own words while they stayed steady. They didn't look like a performer, they looked like a decision. That's what silent intelligence does. It changes how people behave around you, not because you're controlling them, but because your stillness changes the environment. It slows the pace. It makes impulsive people feel their impulsiveness. It makes exaggerated people hear their exaggeration. And the moment someone becomes aware of themselves, the game changes. Most people are fluent in talking. Very few are fluent in restraint. Restraint is rare. That's why it's powerful. But let's be careful here. Outsmarting without saying a word does not mean playing tricks. It doesn't mean hiding motives or setting traps. It means building the kind of inner discipline that makes you difficult to rush, difficult to provoke, and difficult to confuse. You become someone who doesn't react as a reflex. You respond as a choice. Now, and that single shift, reaction to response, is where quiet advantage is born. Imagine a room where everyone is competing to be correct. Opinions collide. Certainty gets louder. People start talking in paragraphs, not sentences. They're not communicating anymore. They're performing certainty. In that kind of room, silence becomes a mirror. If you stay calm, if your face stays clean, if your body stays relaxed, if your eyes stay present, not intense, not evasive, just present, something begins to happen. People start volunteering extra information. They start justifying themselves. They start talking around the thing they don't want to admit because your silence makes them feel the gap. And if you've trained yourself to listen for patterns instead of words, you hear the truth sooner than the noise expects. That's the first form of quiet strategy. letting the room show you its structure before you place yourself inside it. And the second form is even more important. Silence protects your standards. When you speak too quickly, you trade your standards for momentum. You agree to things you haven't measured yet. You promise what you haven't priced. You argue because you feel challenged, not because the argument is worth your energy. Silence interrupts that. Silence gives you a moment to ask a better question inside yourself. What matters here? What outcome is actually healthy? What do I want to be true when this conversation ends? What kind of person do I refuse to become, even to win? That's not weakness, that's leadership. And leadership, real leadership, often sounds quiet. Now there's a reason silence feels difficult at first. Because silence removes your mask. When you stop talking, you can't hide behind personality. You can't use humor to escape discomfort. You can't use intelligence to impress. You can't use speed to avoid thinking. You're just there. And being just there requires self-control. It requires emotional regulation because silence gives other people space to project, to test, to push. Some will fill the gap. Some will try to provoke you into explaining yourself. Some will interpret your calm as arrogance because they're used to reading confidence as aggression. But you don't correct every misunderstanding. You don't chase every interpretation. You let time clarify your intent. This is where ethical strategy begins. You choose not to weaponize silence. You choose not to make people uncomfortable for sport. You simply refuse to rush your words into a space that hasn't earned them yet. Because your words are not decoration, your words are commitments. So you begin to treat speech like a scarce resource, and scarcity changes value. What people who talk constantly have to fight to be heard. People who speak with restraint tend to be listened to because their words carry weight, not because they're mysterious, because they're measured. People are calming. And in a world full of noise, calm feels like competence. That's the third form of quiet advantage, becoming a signal of stability. Stability is persuasive without manipulation. It makes others feel safer. It reduces chaos. It helps people think. It turns heated conversations into workable conversations. And the most interesting part? When you become stable, you start noticing how much of what people call confidence is actually agitation. They're not confident, they're trying to win relief. And once you see that, you stop being impressed by volume. You stop being pulled into debates that exist mainly to soothe someone's insecurity. You stop trying to outsmart people with cleverness. Instead, you outsmart the situation with clarity, because the highest intelligence in a conversation often looks like this: a pause, a breath, a calm face, a simple question, a refusal to be rushed, a refusal to be provoked, a willingness to let silence do what words cannot. Over time, this becomes part of your identity. Not a performance, not a tactic you switch on. A way of moving. You become the kind of person who can stand inside pressure without adding more pressure. And that, as in many environments, work, relationships, conflict, negotiation, changes everything, because the person who stays calm has more choices. The person who stays quiet longer sees more data. The person who doesn't rush to prove themselves keeps their power intact. So in this audiobook, we're going to build that skill carefully. We'll build the ability to read without spying, to influence without exploiting, to hold presence without intimidation, to speak less but mean more, and to become strategically clear without becoming emotionally cold. Not so you can win over people, so you can stop losing yourself in noise. And by the time you finish, you won't need to announce your strength. People will feel it in the pauses you don't fear. The discipline of being unreadable. There is a quiet shift that happens when you stop trying to be understood immediately. Most people enter conversations with a subtle urgency. They want their position clear. They want their personality visible. They want their intelligence recognized. So this urgency is rarely aggressive. Often, It's unconscious. It feels like participation. It feels like engagement. But beneath it, there is a deeper impulse, the need to secure identity in the room. And the moment you need to secure identity, you begin to leak information. You reveal what bothers you. You reveal what excites you. You reveal what threatens you. You reveal what you need. Again, there's nothing wrong with being open. Openness builds connection, but uncontrolled openness, especially in early moments, removes your ability to observe the structure of the situation before you commit to it. Being unreadable is not about being cold, it's about being measured. There is a difference. Coldness creates distance. Measured presence creates curiosity. When you are measured, people can't immediately categorize you. And when people cannot quickly categorize you, they tend to slow down. They listen more carefully. They reveal more cautiously. They check their assumptions. This increases your clarity, and clarity is where ethical advantage lives. Most environments operate on assumptions. Assumptions about competence, assumptions about authority, assumptions about who leads and who follows. These assumptions form quickly, often within minutes. If you rush to define yourself, you participate in those assumptions. If you slow down, you get to see them form. That is powerful, not because you control the narrative, but because you see the narrative before you decide whether to accept it. Let's explore something subtle. When someone asks you a direct question in a group setting, what is your reflex? To answer quickly. Speed feels like confidence, but speed is often pressure. If you answer immediately, you might satisfy the rhythm of the room, but you may also reveal more than necessary. You might take ownership of something you don't need to own. You might step into a debate you didn't need to enter. Instead, imagine this. The question lands. You breathe, you pause, not dramatically, not theatrically, just enough to show you are thinking. That pause changes the dynamic. It signals that you are not reactive. It signals that you value precision. It signals that you are not afraid of silence. And silence, used correctly, resets the tempo of interaction. Tempo matters. The fast tempo favors the impulsive. Slow tempo favors the observant. When you slow the tempo, even slightly, you gain more data. You notice facial reactions. You notice who shifts in their seat. You notice who looks relieved. You notice who looks tense. These microsignals are not mind-reading tools. They are, and patterns tend to repeat. If someone consistently tightens when a certain topic arises, that tells you something about emotional investment. And if someone consistently interrupts when a certain idea surfaces, that tells you something about perceived threat. You are not judging them. You are gathering context. Context reduces mistakes. Mistakes in communication often come from incomplete context. You assume someone is challenging you when they are actually seeking reassurance. You assume someone is disagreeing when they are protecting status. When you remain unreadable, you are less likely to personalize early tension. You observe before reacting. This is emotional discipline, and emotional discipline often looks like quietness. Let's go deeper. There is a tendency to equate transparency with trustworthiness. People say, just be open, just say what you think. But unfiltered honesty is not the same as intelligent communication. If you say every thought as it arises, you may feel authentic, but you lose strategic clarity. Strategic clarity means understanding timing. There are moments when speaking early adds value. There are moments when speaking early reduces your influence. Being unreadable allows you to assess which moment you're in. For example, in a negotiation, the person who speaks first often anchors the discussion, but the person who speaks last often reframes it. If you speak too early, you reveal your ceiling. If you speak too quickly, you reveal your flexibility. Silence does not mean passivity. It means calibration. Calibration is the art of adjusting to reality instead of forcing reality to adjust to you. Most people try to control outcomes by controlling expression. They dominate the conversation, they assert, they argue, they fill the air. But dominance creates resistance. Measured restraint creates stability. Stability invites trust. And trust increases the likelihood that your words, when you do speak, carry weight. Now consider relationships. In personal dynamics, people test each other, often subtly. They may tease, they may provoke, they may push boundaries to see how you react. If you react emotionally every time, you reveal your pressure points. If you shut down completely, you create distance. But if you remain calm, if you acknowledge without overreacting, you send a message without saying it directly. I am steady. Steady people are hard to manipulate, not because they are defensive, but because they are regulated. Emotional regulation is the foundation of being unreadable in a healthy way. It means your internal state is not controlled by every external stimulus. When someone challenges you, you don't rush to defend. When someone praises you, you don't inflate. When someone criticizes you, you don't collapse. You process, you decide. That decision gap is your advantage. Most social mistakes happen inside that missing gap, the space between stimulus and response. When that space is small, and people act reflexively. When that space expands, people act deliberately. Expanding that space requires practice. You practice by tolerating small discomforts without filling them. You practice by letting conversations breathe. You practice by asking yourself one simple question before speaking. Is this necessary? Not is this clever? Not will this impress? Not will this win? Is it necessary? Necessary speech builds credibility. Excess speech dilutes it. And let's address a common fear. If I say less, won't people overlook me? Possibly, at first. But being noticed quickly and being respected over time are not the same thing. Quick visibility often comes from volume. Long-term respect often comes from consistency and restraint. When you consistently speak with intention, people begin to associate your voice with substance, and substance compounds. There is also a psychological effect at play. Humans are pattern-seeking, or when someone talks frequently, the pattern becomes predictable. Predictability lowers perceived depth, not because the person lacks depth, but because overexposure reduces mystery. Measured presence preserves depth. It allows others to lean in. But this only works if your silence is calm, not tense. If your silence is tense, people feel it. Tension feels like suppression. Suppression feels unstable. Calm silence feels different. It feels grounded. But grounded presence often shifts power without effort. In meetings, the grounded person often becomes the emotional center. People glance toward them before final decisions. They check for subtle cues. Why? Because stability becomes reference. If you train yourself to be that reference, not by dominating but by regulating, you increase your influence without speaking more. Now let's connect this to identity. You cannot become unreadable externally if you are chaotic internally. Or if your thoughts are racing, if you need validation, if you're trying to prove worth, silence will feel unbearable. So the real work begins inside. Why do you feel the urge to speak? Is it to contribute, or to secure approval, or to avoid discomfort? Honest answers here are transformative. When you no longer need every room to confirm your intelligence, you become harder to destabilize. And when you are harder to destabilize, people feel it. This is not about superiority. It's about stability. Stability reduces unnecessary conflict. It reduces reactive mistakes. It increases your ability to choose timing instead of surrendering to it. Over time, you will notice something subtle. People begin to fill in the gaps for you. They assume depth because you don't overshare. They assume thoughtfulness because you pause. They assume confidence because you don't rush. You don't need to claim these traits. You embody them. And embodiment is stronger than announcement. There is a final layer to this discipline. Being unreadable does not mean hiding your values, it means revealing them through behavior instead of constant explanation. If you value fairness, demonstrate fairness. If you value, demonstrate discipline. If you value integrity, demonstrate consistency. Words can declare identity, behavior confirms it. When the two align and when speech is measured, your presence becomes quietly formidable. Not intimidating, not threatening, formidable, because people cannot easily push you off balance, and the person who cannot be easily pushed often shapes the direction of interaction without forcing it. This is the foundation, not tricks, not tactics, not psychological games, discipline, emotional regulation, tempo control, measured speech, internal stability. Master this, and you will notice something unexpected. You will speak less, but when you do speak, the room will adjust. And that adjustment is not something you demand, it's something you earn through quiet control of yourself. The power of letting others reveal themselves. There is a quiet truth about human interaction that most people overlook. People reveal more than they intend to, not because they are careless, not because they are weak, but because talking feels relieving. And when someone speaks, they release tension. They clarify themselves, they reduce internal pressure, and in doing so, they often expose patterns of belief, fear, ambition, insecurity, priority. You do not need to interrogate someone to understand them. You only need to create enough space for them to keep speaking. This is not manipulation, it is patience. There is a profound difference. Manipulation seeks to extract. Patience allows disclosure. But when you practice strategic silence, conversations begin to change shape. Instead of you chasing clarity, clarity begins to move toward you. Imagine you are in a meeting, someone presents an idea, you disagree. The reflex is to interrupt, to correct, to refine, to show insight immediately. Instead, you listen fully. You nod lightly, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. You allow the speaker to complete their thought, and when they finish, you wait just one breath longer than normal. Now, often they continue, they elaborate, they soften their stance, they reveal doubts, they clarify limits. Many people refine their own ideas when given uninterrupted space. They adjust without being challenged, they catch their own exaggerations, they narrow their own claims. If you interrupt too early, you rob them of that self-correction. When you let people talk, they often move from position to truth on their own. Position is what someone wants to defend. Truth is what remains after the emotion settles. Silence allows that settling. And when someone settles into truth, you don't need to overpower them. You can engage constructively. You can refine together. You can redirect gently. There is strength in allowing people to complete their emotional arc before you respond. Most arguments escalate because two emotional arcs collide mid-sentence. But if one person holds steady, the energy disperses. This does not mean absorbing disrespect. It means refusing to fuel unnecessary friction. Let's go deeper. When someone speaks at length, they reveal priorities. Notice what they emphasize repeatedly. Notice what examples they choose. Notice what outcomes they fear most. These are not secrets, they are signals. A person who repeatedly mentions risk is likely driven by security. A person who repeatedly mentions recognition may be motivated by visibility. A person who repeatedly mentions fairness may have experienced imbalance. You do not need to label them. You simply adjust your approach with awareness. Understanding motivation increases the likelihood of alignment. If you know someone values stability, frame your proposal in terms of stability. If someone values innovation, frame it in terms of forward movement. If someone values efficiency, emphasize clarity and time saved. You are not changing your message dishonestly. You are communicating in a language they already prioritize. This is ethical influence. Respects their perspective while maintaining your integrity. But this only works if you've listened long enough to detect the pattern. Rushing to speak keeps you in self-expression mode. Listening keeps you in pattern detection mode. Pattern detection is quiet intelligence. There is another layer to this. When people feel heard, they become less defensive. Defensiveness narrows thinking. Calmness widens thinking. It's if someone senses that you are genuinely absorbing their words, not waiting to counter, not preparing your response mid-sentence. Their body relaxes slightly. Their tone stabilizes, their thoughts become clearer. You create psychological safety without announcing it. And when safety increases, honesty tends to increase with it. Again, not guaranteed, not absolute. But often, many conflicts are not about disagreement. They are about not feeling heard. If you allow someone to fully express themselves before responding, you often reduce half the resistance before you even present your perspective. Now, this requires internal control, because while someone speaks, your mind will generate reactions. You will want to interrupt. You will want to defend yourself. You will want to correct misunderstandings. Pause. Let them finish. Correction after full understanding is stronger than correction mid-emotion. And something interesting happens when you respond after full listening. Your words become more precise. You don't over-argue. You don't over-explain. You address the core. Precision builds authority quietly. Authority is not volume. It is clarity delivered at the right moment. Now consider social settings. In group conversations, people often compete subtly for narrative control. Stories become longer, details become exaggerated, humor becomes sharper. If you try to match this energy, you enter performance mode. If you stay composed, attentive, slightly observant, you shift into a different role. The role of the anchor. Anchors do not chase attention, they stabilize it. People often gravitate toward the anchor when conversations become chaotic. They look for subtle cues: approval, reaction, alignment. If you do not give exaggerated reactions, your responses become more meaningful. A small smile carries weight. A brief comment lands deeper. A short question redirects flow. Because you are not overusing your presence, restraint increases impact. There is also something powerful about asking fewer but better questions. When you let someone speak and then ask one focused question, it shows that you are paying attention. It also invites them to clarify what matters most. For example, what outcome feels most important to you here? That single question can reshape a negotiation. Or, what part of this concerns you most? That question reveals the real issue faster than debate. Notice something. You are not confronting, you are uncovering. Uncovering is gentler and often more effective. People resist force. They respond to understanding. The goal is not to outmaneuver people. The goal is to increase shared clarity. Clarity reduces unnecessary conflict. It improves decision quality. It strengthens collaboration, and it positions you as someone thoughtful. Well, now let's address a deeper principle. When you allow others to reveal themselves, you learn who they are over time, not in one interaction. Consistency reveals character. If someone repeatedly shifts positions depending on the room, you notice. If someone consistently follows through, you notice. If someone often exaggerates outcomes, you notice. You do not need to confront every pattern immediately. You store information calmly, and over time you adjust your expectations. Adjustment is smarter than confrontation in many cases. It preserves relationships while protecting your boundaries. This discipline also protects you from premature trust. Trust is valuable, but it is strongest when built gradually. When you let people reveal themselves across multiple interactions, your trust becomes grounded in evidence, not impulse. That reduces disappointment. It also reduces cynicism. You are not assuming the worst. You are simply observing consistently. Or observation without hostility is powerful. It allows you to move intelligently without becoming suspicious. Now, there is a temptation when you realize how much people reveal to feel superior. Avoid that. Understanding human behavior does not make you above it. You reveal patterns too. The difference is awareness. When you become aware of your own patterns, your own tendencies to defend, to impress, to retreat, you gain control over them. Self-awareness is the ethical foundation of social intelligence. If you only observe others and not yourself, your clarity becomes imbalance. Balanced awareness means you notice your own emotional shifts as quickly as you notice others. If you feel triggered, you pause internally. If you feel defensive, you breathe. If you feel competitive, you recalibrate. This keeps your silence grounded, not strategic posturing, but real regulation.
And regulated presence changes conversations more than clever arguments. Over time, something remarkable happens. People begin to open up around you without being asked because they feel space to think, space to express, space to refine. You become someone people process around, and that is influence without pressure. Influence built on pressure collapses when pressure increases. Influence built on stability endures. Remember, the goal is not to dominate conversations.
The goal is to understand them. When you understand the emotional structure of a room, you can choose when to contribute and when to conserve. Conservation of energy is intelligence. Not every opinion needs your voice. Not every error needs your correction. Not every comment needs your reaction. Choose carefully. When you speak rarely but clearly, you avoid unnecessary entanglements. And when you allow others to reveal themselves fully before responding, you increase the likelihood that your response lands accurately. Accuracy is power. Not loud power, not aggressive power, clean power. And clean power rarely needs to explain itself twice. Mastering emotional neutrality under pressure. There is a moment in almost every important interaction when emotion begins to rise. It may be subtle at first, a slight tightening in the chest, a faster breath, a change in tone, yours or someone else's. Or the conversation shifts from neutral to charged. Most people do not notice the exact moment this shift occurs. They only notice when they are already inside it. And once inside, their behavior changes. They speak faster, they defend more strongly, they interrupt, they justify, they over-explain. Emotion itself is not the problem. Unmanaged emotion is. If you want to outsmart everyone without saying a word, you must first outsmart your own emotional reflexes, not suppress them. Not deny them, but regulate them. Because pressure is where most intelligence collapses. Think about high-stakes moments, negotiations, disagreements, performance reviews, family conflicts, public discussions. In these moments, people reveal their emotional bandwidth. Some become louder, some become defensive, some withdraw, some become sarcastic. Very few remain steady. Steadiness is rare, and rarity carries weight. When emotion rises in a room and one person remains calm, not cold,
not detached but steady, that person subtly shifts the center of gravity. Why? Because emotional intensity seeks reaction. If it does not receive reaction, it often lowers. This does not mean you ignore disrespect. It means you choose timing. Let's explore something important. When someone challenges you emotionally, they are often seeking one of three things: validation, control, relief. They may not know which, but their nervous system is trying to stabilize itself.
While if you respond emotionally, you join their instability. If you respond calmly, you introduce regulation into the interaction. Regulation spreads. It may not happen instantly. It may not always succeed, but it often reduces escalation. Emotional neutrality is not indifference. It is balance. It is the ability to experience emotion without being directed by it. And this skill is trainable. Start with awareness. When you feel a surge, anger, defensiveness, embarrassment, pause internally. You just do not rush to respond. Let your breath slow slightly. You do not need a dramatic pause, just enough space to prevent reflex. That space is power. Inside that space, ask yourself quietly, what outcome do I actually want here? Not how do I win this moment, not how do I prove them wrong, but what outcome protects my long-term position? Short-term emotional victories often create long-term relational costs. Emotional neutrality protects the long game. Now imagine a scenario. Someone criticizes your idea in a meeting. Their tone is sharp. The room goes quiet. Most people react quickly in this situation. They defend immediately. They justify the logic. They counterattack. But if you remain steady, if you maintain relaxed posture, even tone, measured eye contact, you send a different signal. You signal confidence in your own stability. Then you might respond with something simple. Tell me more about your concern. This does several things. First, it prevents escalation. Second, it shifts the burden of clarity back to the critic. Third, it gives you more information before you commit. Information is always safer than assumption. When people are emotional, they often exaggerate slightly. If you counter immediately, you may be arguing against an exaggerated position instead of the real issue. By asking them to elaborate, you give them space to refine. Sometimes their intensity softens as they clarify. Sometimes they realize their concern is narrower than their tone suggested. Sometimes they reveal useful insight you hadn't considered. All of these outcomes are better than reflex defense. Neutrality increases your access to truth. Let's address a common misunderstanding. Neutrality does not mean you do not care. It means you care enough not to let emotion distort your response. When you can hold composure while others fluctuate, you become predictable in the best way. Predictable does not mean boring, it means reliable. Reliability builds trust. Trust increases influence. Influence allows your words to travel further with less effort. Now consider another layer. Emotional neutrality protects your dignity. When someone tries to provoke you through sarcasm, exaggeration, or subtle disrespect, the impulse is to respond in kind. But matching tone often lowers your position. Instead, calm responses elevate you. You might say, I see it differently. No edge, no sarcasm, no aggression, just clarity. When you refuse to engage in emotional escalation, you conserve energy. Energy conservation is strategic. Every argument you avoid unnecessarily leaves more focus for what matters. Over time, people begin to notice something. You are difficult to destabilize, and people tend to test less when they realize their tests do not produce reactions. This is not manipulation, it is consistency. Consistency reduces attempts at provocation. There is another advantage to emotional neutrality. It improves decision quality. When emotion dominates, cognitive clarity narrows. You focus on threat, not nuance. When you remain balanced, you maintain access to broader perspective. Broader perspective improves judgment. Improved judgment increases long-term advantage. This is especially critical in conflict. Conflict reveals character. If you react aggressively, you may win the argument but lose the relationship. If you collapse defensively, you may preserve the relationship but lose respect. Neutral firmness is the middle path. It sounds like this. I understand your frustration. Here's where I stand. Notice the structure. Acknowledgement first. Position second. Acknowledgement reduces tension. Position maintains boundary. You are not surrendering. You are structuring. Structure is strength. Now let's examine something deeper. Monks, why do we react emotionally in the first place? Often because our identity feels threatened. When someone criticizes your idea, you may hear, "You are incompetent." When someone disagrees strongly, you may hear, "You are wrong." But disagreement is not identity erasure. If you separate your identity from your ideas, neutrality becomes easier. Ideas can evolve. Identity remains steady. When your sense of self is not tied to being right in every moment, you gain flexibility. But flexibility is adaptive intelligence. Rigid people break under pressure. Flexible people adjust without losing shape. Emotional neutrality makes flexibility possible. This skill also improves personal relationships. In close relationships, emotional escalation can happen quickly. Tone shifts, assumptions form, words are misinterpreted. If both people react immediately, conflict intensifies. If one person slows the tempo, lowers their voice, reduces speed, and listens fully, the dynamic often stabilizes. You do not need to dominate, you need to regulate. Regulation is leadership at the emotional level. And emotional leadership is often silent. You lead by example, by tone, by posture, by breathing, by pacing. Others often mirror calm unconsciously, not always, but often, and even when they do not, you maintain your own clarity. Clarity under pressure is rare. Rare qualities attract attention.
When you consistently remain steady in high-pressure environments, people begin to consult you in difficult moments, not because you speak the most, but because you react the least. That distinction matters. Now, neutrality also requires self-reflection. If you are carrying unresolved frustration, neutrality becomes harder. Unresolved emotion seeks outlets, so part of mastering emotional neutrality is processing your feelings outside of high-stakes moments. Reflect privately. Journal.
Think clearly. Exercise. Have honest conversations in safe contexts. Emotional hygiene prevents spillover. When your internal state is clean, external pressure has less leverage over you. And leverage matters. If someone knows what triggers you, they may consciously or unconsciously press it. If you regulate your triggers, you remove easy leverage. Again, not through suppression, but through understanding. Understanding your own patterns is the highest form of self-discipline. And when you know what tends to unsettle you, you can prepare for it. Preparation reduces surprise. Reduced surprise reduces reactivity. Over time, neutrality becomes less effortful. It becomes your baseline. You become the person who can sit in tension without amplifying it, the person who can listen to criticism without collapsing, the person who can hear praise without inflating, balanced, measured, grounded. And here is the quiet truth. When people cannot control your emotional state, they cannot easily control the direction of interaction. Control here does not mean domination. It means influence. If someone can predict that you will react strongly, they can steer you. If your reactions are regulated, steering becomes harder. You choose your direction. That choice is silent power. And silent power does not need dramatic gestures. It lives in composure, in breath.
In the decision to respond instead of react. Master this, and you will notice something subtle. The room begins to adjust to your pace. Conversation slows slightly around you. Emotions settle more quickly. And when you finally speak, your words are not charged with agitation. They are charged with clarity. Clarity travels further, and you didn't need to raise your voice once. Controlling tempo without controlling people.
Most people try to influence outcomes by increasing intensity. They speak louder, they speak faster, they speak more. Intensity feels powerful, but intensity is often unstable. True influence does not come from increasing force. It comes from managing tempo. Tempo is the speed of interaction. It is the rhythm of conversation, the pace of decisions, the timing of responses, and whoever manages tempo often shapes the outcome without appearing dominant. Because this is not about manipulating people, it is about regulating the environment through your own pacing. Consider this carefully. When conversations accelerate, thinking tends to narrow. When conversations slow slightly, thinking tends to widen. Speed reduces nuance. Slowness increases perspective. In many high-pressure situations, people rush, not because speed is required, but because discomfort is present. Silence feels uncomfortable. Uncertainty feels uncomfortable. When waiting feels uncomfortable. So they rush, and in rushing they reveal urgency. Urgency reduces leverage. If you seem rushed, you appear invested beyond flexibility. If you seem impatient, you appear dependent on the outcome. Dependence weakens positioning. Calm pacing communicates optionality. Optionality strengthens positioning. Let's examine this in practice. Imagine you are in a negotiation. The other person pushes for an immediate answer. They increase speed. They add pressure. And can we finalize this now? Let's not overthink it. We need to decide. The natural impulse is to respond quickly, either to agree or to resist. But a measured response shifts the dynamic. You might say calmly, "I'd like a moment to think through that." Simple. Controlled, neutral. You are not refusing. You are not surrendering. You are stabilizing tempo. And when you stabilize tempo, you reclaim cognitive clarity. People who control tempo control clarity. Clarity is influence. And now consider meetings. Often the person who speaks first sets the emotional tone. If they are frantic, the room becomes frantic. If they are defensive, the room becomes guarded. If they are composed, the room settles. You do not need authority to influence tone. You need consistency. If you speak at a measured pace, maintain steady eye contact, and avoid reacting to minor provocations, you introduce a stabilizing rhythm. Over time, others adapt. A human interaction tends toward synchronization. When one person maintains slow, deliberate pacing, the group often unconsciously mirrors it. This is not guaranteed, but it tends to happen frequently enough to matter. Tempo management also applies to answering questions. When someone asks you something challenging, avoid immediate reaction. Pause briefly. Think. Respond clearly and concisely. That pause does several things. It signals thoughtfulness. It reduces impulsive wording. It lowers emotional temperature. It also subtly repositions you as someone who chooses their timing. Choosing timing is power, not dramatic power, not visible power, quiet power. Now let's go deeper. There are moments when silence is not enough. You must speak. But even then, brevity becomes strategic. Long explanations often dilute impact. Short, precise statements carry more weight. For example, instead of arguing extensively, you might say, "I don't see it that way," and then stop. The silence after that sentence forces others to respond. If you continue speaking, you fill the space and reduce tension. If you stop, you transfer responsibility back to the room. This is tempo control. You are not forcing agreement, you are allowing reflection. Reflection changes conversations. Now here is something subtle. People who talk excessively often attempt to maintain control through volume, but volume exhausts, or measured pacing conserves. Conservation is strategic endurance. In long discussions, the person who remains mentally fresh often shapes the conclusion. If you react emotionally early, you burn energy. If you regulate tempo, preserved energy increases patience. Patience increases clarity. Clarity improves positioning. Everything connects. Let's explore how tempo relates to perception. When someone moves slowly but deliberately, they often appear confident. When someone rushes constantly, they may appear anxious, even if they are intelligent. This perception is not always fair, but it is common. Deliberate pacing suggests internal security. Security builds trust. Trust increases receptivity. When others trust your steadiness, they are more likely to consider your perspective. This does not mean you move slowly in all situations. Adaptability matters. Sometimes speed is necessary. But speed chosen deliberately feels different than speed driven by pressure. The difference is internal. Ask yourself, am I accelerating because it serves the situation or because I feel uncomfortable? That question restores control. Now consider conflict again. When tension rises, voices tend to rise with it. If you intentionally lower your volume slightly, not dramatically, just subtly, you change the dynamic. Lower volume forces others to listen more carefully. It reduces escalation. It introduces calm without announcing it. The person who lowers intensity often becomes the stabilizer. Stabilizers guide outcomes more effectively than agitators. Agitation creates reaction. Stability creates alignment. Let's examine decision-making environments. When decisions are rushed, errors increase. When decisions are delayed excessively, opportunities diminish. Tempo management requires calibration. You do not slow everything. You slow what matters, and you accelerate what is clear. Discerning the difference is intelligence, and intelligence expressed through timing feels grounded, not aggressive. Now, there is another powerful element of tempo: delayed response, not avoidance, not withdrawal, but deliberate delay when appropriate. If someone sends a provocative message, you do not need to respond immediately. If someone challenges you publicly, you do not need to counter instantly. Time allows emotion to settle, yours and theirs. Delayed response often improves quality. Quality improves impact, shapes perception. People begin to associate you with thoughtfulness rather than reactivity. Reactivity feels impulsive. Thoughtfulness feels controlled. Control of self is the only sustainable form of control. Now let's look at body language. Tempo is not only verbal, it is physical. If your movements are rushed, tapping, shifting, interrupting, you signal agitation. If your posture is relaxed but upright, movements minimal, gestures purposeful, you signal stability. Stability influences group behavior. This influence is subtle. It accumulates. Over time, people sense that you are not easily hurried, and that makes it harder for others to pressure you unfairly. Pressure works best on those who fear delay. If you do not fear delay, pressure loses force. This does not mean you stall. It means you decide. Decision authority over your own timing increases respect. Respect increases space, or space increases clarity. Clarity improves results. Now let's address something important. Controlling tempo is not about frustrating others. It is about protecting the quality of interaction. If someone genuinely needs urgency, an emergency, a critical deadline, you respond appropriately. Tempo control is not rigid slowness. It is adaptive pacing. Adaptability combined with composure creates strong leadership presence. Even without formal authority, you may not always notice it immediately, but people begin to defer slightly. They wait for your response before finalizing. They check your reaction before committing because you are not rushed, and those who are not rushed appear less dependent on outcomes. Less dependence increases perceived strength. Again, not dominance, strength. Strength rooted in regulation. There is a final layer to tempo, internal tempo. Your thoughts can race even if your voice is calm. Internal racing leaks into subtle signals, micro-expressions, tone shifts, posture tension. To manage external tempo effectively, you must manage internal pace. Practice slowing your thinking. When under pressure, narrow focus to the present sentence. Not the entire future consequence, just the current exchange. Present focus stabilizes cognition. Stabilized cognition improves speech. Improved speech increases influence. Everything begins internally. If you can slow your mind, you can slow your words. If you can slow your words, you can slow the room. If you can slow the room, you can increase clarity, and clarity often determines outcome more than force ever could. Remember, you are not trying to control people. You are controlling yourself. And when you control yourself, your pace, your timing, your responses, you shape environments without announcing it. You become the quiet regulator, the steady presence, the person whose timing feels intentional. And intentional timing often wins without noise, reading the room without assuming the worst. There is a difference between awareness and suspicion. Awareness sharpens you, suspicion hardens you. If you want to outsmart everyone without saying a word, you must develop awareness without drifting into cynicism, because once you assume everyone is deceptive, your perception distorts. You begin looking for threats instead of truth. You interpret neutral behavior as hidden strategy. You react defensively to situations that required only patience. That is not intelligence, that is insecurity disguised as caution. True social intelligence is cleaner than that. It observes, it listens, it gathers patterns, but it does not invent enemies. Reading the room is not about detecting danger everywhere. It is about understanding emotional climate. Every environment has a climate. Some rooms are competitive. Some are collaborative, some are anxious, some are distracted, some are fatigued. Most people enter a room focused on what they want to say. Fewer enter asking, "What is the atmosphere here?" Atmosphere determines how your words will land. You could say something intelligent in the wrong climate and be ignored. You could say something simple in the right climate and be influential. Climate matters. And climate is read through observation, not assumption. Start with energy level. Is the room tense or relaxed? Are people leaning forward or back? Are conversations clipped or flowing? Notice pacing. Are people speaking quickly, interrupting, or are they thoughtful, measured? Notice hierarchy dynamics. Who do people look at before responding? Who gets interrupted? Who rarely speaks but receives attention when they do? You are not judging, you are mapping. Mapping reduces social error. If you know who carries informal authority, you can frame your ideas accordingly. And if you know who feels unheard, you can include them strategically. Inclusion builds alignment, alignment reduces friction. Now, there is something subtle about reading emotional cues. People communicate more through tone and posture than through words. A person might say, "That's fine," but their body tightens. A person might say, "No problem," but their voice sharpens slightly. These discrepancies matter, but do not overinterpret. One signal is not a verdict. Look for patterns. If tone and posture consistently contradict words across multiple interactions, that suggests unresolved tension. If inconsistencies appear only once, it may be situational stress. Intelligence means allowing margin for context. Now let's explore something deeper. Many people react to what is said. Fewer respond to why it is being said. If someone speaks aggressively, ask internally, what might be driving this? Fear of losing status, pressure from above,
Frustration from previous failure? You are not excusing poor behavior, you are expanding perspective. Expanded perspective reduces emotional reactivity. If you assume aggression equals hostility toward you personally, you react defensively. If you consider that aggression may stem from external pressure, you can remain calm. Calm allows choice. Choice improves outcomes. Let's consider a workplace scenario. A colleague dismisses your idea abruptly. You could assume disrespect.
Or you could observe, is this their usual style? Are they under deadline pressure? Have they behaved similarly toward others? Pattern evaluation prevents premature confrontation. If dismissal is habitual, you address it calmly and directly at an appropriate time. If it is situational, you may simply clarify. Reading the room includes reading individuals over time. Now here is where many people lose advantage. They personalize neutral dynamics. If a group conversation flows around you without direct inclusion, it may not be rejection, it may be momentum. If someone forgets to respond to a message, it may not be intentional avoidance, it may be overload. Assuming negative intent prematurely destabilizes your emotional neutrality, and emotional neutrality is your foundation. So instead of assuming, verify gently when necessary. Just checking, did you see my earlier message? Neutral tone, no accusation. Clarity without hostility. That is intelligent communication. Now, reading the room also involves understanding emotional contagion. Emotions spread. If one person enters anxious, the group may absorb some of it. If one person enters calm, the group may stabilize slightly. Ask yourself, what energy am I bringing into this space? Because you are part of the climate too. Outsmarting without speaking often means adjusting your energy before adjusting your words. If the room is tense, reduce intensity. If the room is disengaged, increase focus and clarity. If the room is competitive, speak with precision, not aggression. Adaptation without losing identity, that is advanced awareness. Now let's address hierarchy more carefully. In many environments, formal authority does not equal actual influence. Sometimes the quietest person holds significant credibility. Sometimes the most vocal person lacks trust. Observe response patterns. When someone speaks, do others lean in? Or do they glance at phones? When someone proposes an idea, does discussion build or does it fade? Attention reveals influence. Influence reveals alignment points. Aligning with credible voices ethically and authentically strengthens positioning. This is not flattery, it is calibration. Calibration prevents unnecessary resistance. Now, reading the room also requires reading yourself. If you enter a space feeling insecure, you may misinterpret neutral cues as rejection. What if you enter overly confident? You may ignore subtle disagreement. Self-awareness reduces distortion. Ask yourself, am I projecting anything onto this situation? Projection clouds judgment. Clarity begins with internal honesty. Now let's examine tension. Tension in a room is not always negative. Sometimes it signals importance. Important conversations often carry weight. Weight feels like tension. The goal is not to eliminate tension, it is to navigate it. If tension rises, to observe who escalates and who stabilizes. Align yourself with stabilization. If someone attacks verbally, do not mirror tone, lower it. If someone interrupts, wait patiently, then continue calmly. You demonstrate steadiness. Steadiness under tension often elevates perceived credibility. People respect composure, not because it dominates, because it reassures. Now, here is something subtle but powerful. When you read the room accurately, you speak less but more precisely. Instead of offering 10 ideas, you offer one that fits the moment. Instead of defending broadly, you address the core concern. Precision increases perceived intelligence, volume decreases it. Because precision signals understanding. Understanding signals awareness. Awareness signals control of self. Now avoid over-calculating. If you analyze every micro-expression obsessively, you lose authenticity. Reading the room should feel fluid, not forced. It becomes natural with practice. Like sensing temperature when you walk outside. You do not measure it scientifically, you feel it. Then you adjust clothing accordingly. Similarly, you feel the social temperature. Then you adjust tone and pacing, that's it. No drama, no suspicion, no games, just awareness. Now let's address something important. Not every room deserves your full strategic investment. Some conversations are casual, some environments are low stakes. Use discernment. Over-strategizing trivial interactions drains energy. Reserve deeper awareness for environments that affect your long-term position. Conserve mental bandwidth. Energy management is intelligence. Now there is an advanced layer to reading the room. Watch how people treat those with less power. This reveals character faster than how they treat superiors. If someone is respectful upward but dismissive downward, note it. Not to judge harshly, but to calibrate trust. Consistency reveals integrity. Integrity affects reliability. Reliability affects partnership potential. These observations help you decide how deeply to invest. Investment decisions matter. Now remember, reading the room is not about outmaneuvering others. It is about reducing blind spots. Blind spots create mistakes. Awareness reduces mistakes. Fewer mistakes increase stability. Stability builds influence. Influence shapes outcomes quietly. And here is the most important part.
Because you can read a room perfectly and still choose humility. Awareness is not license for superiority. It is responsibility. If you understand dynamics better than others, use that understanding to clarify, not to exploit. Use it to stabilize, not to intimidate. Use it to elevate conversation quality, not to dominate it, because long-term respect is built on integrity. Integrity sustains advantage. And when people sense that your awareness is clean, not manipulative, they relax around you.
Relaxed people communicate more honestly. Honest communication increases alignment. Alignment improves outcomes. You see how everything connects? Silence gave you space. Neutrality gave you steadiness. Tempo gave you control of pace. Awareness gives you accuracy. And accuracy combined with restraint makes you quietly formidable. Not loud, not flashy, formidable. because you see clearly without overreacting, and when you finally speak, it fits the moment perfectly. T. Strategic restraint. Saying less. So, your words mean more. There is a paradox in communication. The more you speak, the less weight your words tend to carry. The less you speak, intentionally, not timidly, the more gravity your voice develops. This is not about being quiet for the sake of mystery. It is about understanding cognitive saturation. When people hear too many words, their attention fragments. They stop distinguishing signal from noise. And even strong ideas lose sharpness when buried inside excessive explanation. Strategic restraint sharpens signal. Think about this carefully. In many conversations, people do not lose influence because their ideas are weak. They lose influence because they overdefend. They explain beyond necessity. They repeat their point multiple times. They add justifications that dilute strength. Over-justification signals uncertainty, even if you feel certain. When you trust your clarity, you do not need to exhaust it. You state it once, you support it briefly, you stop. Silence after a clear statement forces processing. Processing is where influence settles. If you fill silence immediately, you interrupt processing. Now, restraint does not mean withholding necessary information. It means distinguishing between essential and excessive. Ask yourself internally, what is the core message? Strip away decoration. Remove emotional filler. Deliver the core. For example, now instead of speaking for several minutes defending your position, you might say calmly, I believe this approach reduces risk while preserving flexibility. Then stop. Let others respond. If clarification is requested, provide it. But do not preemptively defend every angle. Preemptive defense often invites attack. Measured delivery invites engagement. Now consider another dynamic. When you speak less, others speak more. When others speak more, they reveal more. We explored this earlier, but here it becomes sharper. If you dominate conversations, you reduce your access to information. If you conserve speech, you increase it. Information is leverage, not for manipulation, but for accuracy. Accuracy strengthens decision-making. Strong decisions increase long-term positioning. Now let's examine presence. Some individuals speak sparingly, yet when they do speak, the room quiets. Why? Because their words are rare. Rarity increases perceived value. If every comment from you is intentional, people learn that you do not speak casually. That reputation compounds. Over time, people anticipate substance from you. Anticipation magnifies impact. This does not require artificial silence. It requires discipline. Discipline means you resist the urge to comment on everything. You do not correct every minor inaccuracy. You do not offer opinions on topics that do not affect your position. You conserve. Conservation protects authority. Now, there is a psychological principle worth understanding. People subconsciously measure confidence through economy of language. Those who speak in concise, composed sentences often appear more assured than those who rush through extended monologues. Length does not equal depth. Clarity equals depth. Clarity is often concise. Consider negotiations again. If you explain your rationale extensively before the other party responds, you reveal your thinking structure, and you expose your bottom line indirectly. Instead, state your proposal clearly and wait. Silence creates space for the other party to move. If you move too quickly, you reduce their movement. Movement reveals position. Position reveals flexibility. Flexibility reveals opportunity. Patience reveals structure. Now let's address something important. Many people overspeak because they fear being misunderstood. That fear is understandable. But over-explaining does not eliminate misunderstanding. It often creates new confusion. Instead, deliver clear structure, short sentences, simple language, measured tone. If someone misunderstands, clarify directly. Clarity in response is stronger than preemptive excess. Now consider personal relationships. In emotionally charged moments, people often say too much. They stack grievances. They reference past conflicts. They add unnecessary commentary. And in doing so, More they weaken their position. If something needs to be addressed, address the present issue. Do not overload the moment. Overloading creates defensiveness. Precision invites resolution. For example, when that happened, I felt dismissed. That sentence is enough. No long lecture, no historical archive. If discussion continues, expand thoughtfully. But begin with precision. Precision preserves dignity. Dignity strengthens influence. Now, restraint also applies to humor and wit. It is tempting to insert clever remarks frequently. Humor can build rapport. But constant humor reduces perceived seriousness. Balance matters. Occasional humor strengthens connection. Excess humor can dilute authority. You choose based on context. Awareness guides selection. Now let's examine disagreement. When someone challenges you, the instinct is to respond fully. Instead, try this structure. Acknowledge briefly, state your position, stop. For example, I understand your concern, I see it differently. Then wait. The pause after this is powerful. It signals that you are not scrambling to defend. You are grounded responses increase respect. Respect increases receptivity. Now, silence also protects you from unnecessary entanglement. In group settings, conversations can drift into trivial debate. Not every debate deserves your energy. If the topic does not affect your goals or values meaningfully, abstain. Participation is optional. Strategic abstention preserves focus. Focus strengthens long-term positioning. Now let's explore identity. If you derive identity from being the most articulate person in the room, restraint will feel threatening. You may feel invisible. But influence built on constant articulation is fragile. Influence built on selective articulation is resilient. Resilience sustains advantage. When your identity is not tied to constant verbal dominance, you gain freedom. Freedom to observe, freedom to choose timing, freedom to conserve. Conservation increases power density. Power density means your words carry more force per sentence. Now consider body language again. When you speak less, your non-verbal cues become more noticeable. Maintain steady posture. Avoid fidgeting. Keep gestures purposeful. Non-verbal steadiness reinforces verbal restraint. Together they build presence. Presence influences before words arrive. Now let's address a fear. As if I say less, where will others dominate unfairly? Sometimes temporarily. But dominance without depth collapses over time. If someone talks excessively without substance, patterns become visible. If you speak sparingly with substance, patterns become respected. Consistency matters. You do not need to compete on volume. You compete on clarity. Clarity outlasts volume. Now consider leadership. Leaders who speak endlessly lose attention. Leaders who speak with measured clarity command it. Measured clarity shows thoughtfulness. Thoughtfulness increases trust. Trust increases influence. Influence shapes outcomes. Now, strategic restraint also protects emotional stability. When you speak impulsively, you may regret tone or wording. When you pause before speaking, regret increases confidence. Confidence built on discipline feels calm, not inflated. Now here is a powerful principle. If something can be expressed in one sentence, do not use 5. And if it requires 3 sentences, do not use 10. Compression strengthens impact. Impact shapes memory. People remember concise clarity more than extended commentary. Now, restraint does not eliminate warmth. You can still be approachable. You can still listen actively. You can still express appreciation. Restraint is not coldness. It is economy. Economy of words. Economy of emotion. Economy of reaction. Economy preserves strength. Now imagine this long term. Over months and years, people associate you with measured speech. They know that when you speak, it matters. They anticipate insight. Anticipation amplifies effect. You do not need dramatic delivery, calm tone, clear words. Stop. And the silence after your statement will often carry as much weight as the statement itself. And precision is a quiet form of intelligence. There is something almost ironic about this entire journey.
You began with the idea of outsmarting everyone without saying a word. It sounds like strategy, it sounds like advantage, it sounds like power. But if you look closely at everything we've built, you'll notice something deeper. This was never about outsmarting people. It was about outgrowing reflex, outgrowing the need to rush, outgrowing the need to prove, outgrowing the need to react, outgrowing the need to dominate conversations to feel secure.
Yes, because the loudest battles are often internal. The impulse to fill silence, the urge to defend instantly, the discomfort of uncertainty, the hunger for immediate validation. When you master those impulses, something shifts. You stop fighting rooms, you start shaping them. Quietly, let's reflect on what you now understand. Silence is not emptiness, it is observation. When you allow space before speaking, you gather information that others miss. You see patterns, you detect motivations, you sense emotional climate. And that awareness gives you options. Options are power, not aggressive power. Adaptive power. You learned emotional neutrality, not suppression, regulation. The ability to feel without flaring, to listen without absorbing instability, to stand steady while others fluctuate. Steadiness becomes magnetic in chaotic environments. You learned to control tempo, to slow interactions just enough to think clearly, and to resist pressure without confrontation, to reclaim timing without apology. The one who controls their pace controls their clarity, and clarity shapes direction. You learned strategic restraint. That speaking less often increases the weight of your words. That brevity, when intentional, commands attention. That silence after clarity reinforces authority. You learn to read the room without assuming the worst. Awareness without paranoia. Observation without hostility. Discernment without cynicism. You learn to let others reveal themselves. To listen structurally. To gather patterns instead of chasing surface arguments. And when you finally speak, you speak from full context, not assumption. You learned strategic ambiguity, not deception, not avoidance, but protecting flexibility until clarity is formed. You learned the discipline of selective non-reaction. Not every provocation deserves your energy. Not every challenge deserves your response. Energy conservation is strength. You learned quiet confidence, confidence that does not perform, confidence that does not inflate, confidence that does not collapse under scrutiny, just steady presence. And, finally, you learned that reputation compounds, that consistent behavior shapes perception long before you speak. And once perception solidifies, influence requires less effort. Now here is the deeper truth. When you stop trying to outsmart everyone, you actually become harder to outmaneuver, because reactive people are predictable. Predictable people are steerable, but regulated people are stable, and stability disrupts manipulation. Manipulation depends on emotional movement. If you do not move easily, the leverage weakens. This is not about controlling others, it is about being difficult to destabilize. When you cannot be destabilized easily, you cannot be rushed into poor decisions. Then you cannot be baited into unnecessary conflict. You cannot be pressured into premature commitments. You remain centered. Individuals shape environments more than they realize, because calm spreads, clarity spreads, deliberate pacing spreads. You become the anchor in rooms that once overwhelmed you. Now imagine this applied consistently at work, in negotiation, in family conversations, in friendships, in moments of public scrutiny. You walk in, you observe first. You regulate second, you speak third, and when you speak it is measured, clear, intentional, no extra words, no emotional spikes, no overcommitment, just precision. And over time, people adjust around you. They pause slightly when you pause. They lower tone when you lower tone. They think longer when you think longer, not because you instructed them. Because stability influences systems, You become the silent stabilizer, the quiet calibrator, or the person whose presence reduces noise. Now here is the most important part. This discipline is not about being cold. It is not about withholding warmth. It is not about distancing yourself from connection. In fact, it strengthens connection, because when you are not reactive, others feel safer expressing themselves. When you are not defensive, others feel heard. When you are not rushing, others feel respected. Respect deepens trust. Trust strengthens relationships. And relationships, when built on stability, endure. There will still be moments when you misstep, moments when emotion rises too quickly, moments when you speak too soon. That is human. But recovery speed matters more than perfection. Return to center, recalibrate, continue. Over time, the discipline becomes natural, silence becomes comfortable, pauses become powerful, observation becomes instinctive, and you will notice something subtle. See, you no longer feel the urge to win interactions, you feel the urge to improve them. That shift changes everything, because improving interactions builds long-term advantage. Winning moments often costs it. The world is full of noise, volume, opinion, reaction, speed. But few cultivate stillness, few cultivate disciplined timing. That rarity is your advantage. And it requires no announcement, no display, no dramatic gestures, just consistency. But you do not need to be the smartest voice in the room. You need to be the most stable presence. Stability wins in the long arc, because decisions made calmly are often wiser. Relationships managed calmly last longer. Opportunities navigated calmly produce better results. So the next time you feel the urge to speak quickly, pause. The next time you feel the urge to defend immediately, breathe. The next time silence feels uncomfortable, stay. Because inside that silence is leverage. Inside that restraint is clarity. Inside that clarity is quiet authority. And authority expressed calmly travels further than noise ever could. Outsmarting everyone without saying a word is not about defeating others. It is about mastering yourself so completely that external chaos loses its grip. When you master yourself, you shape outcomes. When you shape outcomes, you no longer need to perform intelligence. It becomes evident in your presence, steady, measured, deliberate.
Quietly powerful.